of Ukraine and the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding. Now on with today's meeting. First, we will have a roll call to document everyone's presence at the meeting. And as a reminder, this meeting will be broadcast live streamed on the COG website through our YouTube account. And so I'd now like to ask Ms. Sharon Pandek to conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go first with the District of Columbia. I see Mr. Allen. Is there anyone else here from the district? Mr. Kinlow. Thank you very much, sir. Anyone else from the district? Turning now to the state of Maryland. I'm going to call names since I have quite a list. Mr. Adams, Mr. Collins, Ms. Coates, Mr. Bowling. From Frederick, Mr. O'Connor. Frederick County, Ms. Gardner, Ms. Schaefer. College Park, Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Wohan. Thank you, sir.
And I think that was Ms. Mitchell.
Ms. Mitchell.
And I think
yes,
Mayor
Ms.
Newton
Mitchell.
and Mayor O'Connor are on the screen, as is Mayor Adams.
Thank you. Gaithersburg, Mr. Wu, Mr. Harris. Greenbelt, I see Mr. Jordan, Ms. Weaver. Laurel, Mr. Moe, Mr. Sidner.
We're here.
Montgomery County, thank you, Mr. Sidner. I saw Mr. Ehrlich, Mr. Matalano, Ms. Kazari, Mr. Hucker, Ms. Navarro. Prince George's County, Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Jackson. Thank you. Mr. Hawkins. Present. Mr. Harrison. I saw Ms. Newton. Ms. Stewart, I've seen from Tacoma Park. Mr. Feldman. Mr. Kovar.
And Councilmember Navarro is on the screen.
Thank you very much. Alexandria, I'm in Virginia now. Mr. Wilson, I saw you, yes. Mr. McPike, Mr. Dorsey, I saw you. Mr. Mayor, saw you. Ms. Miller, Mr. McKay, Mr. Walkinshaw, Ms. Gross, I saw you. Mr. Stork, Mr. Lusk, I saw you. Mr. Alcorn, Mr. Snyder, Ms. Briskman, I saw you. Ms. Randall, Mr. Wolf, Mr. Moore, Ms. Wheeler, Ms. Bailey.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Barker. Mr. Chairman, I believe we have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pandek. We appreciate that. And as a reminder, we are meeting here in person today, but we continue to plan to alternate our meetings with the subsequent meeting being virtual. And as a result, we've asked staff to review the bylaws of COG to reflect this new normal, where we want to include both these in-person and virtual meetings. As you may recall, our ability to meet virtually was impacted by our passing some emergency language to our bylaws, and now as we have this new standard and normal, we just want to do some organizational hygiene and make sure our bylaws align. For today's meeting, since we are in person, we're going to be doing the traditional method of voting, or at least tradition before the pandemic, where we do things via voice. So aye, nay, or abstain, or if you request a hand vote or a roll call vote. And today, I don't think this is usually an issue for us, but just as a reminder, participation in discussion and votes should be by the principal member of a jurisdiction if that member is present. If that primary principal member is not here, of course, the designated alternate is welcome to fully participate. And next, I'd like to remind everyone that in your board packet, there's a list of the meeting dates for our 2022 meeting schedule. So please make sure that those are in your calendar, and note that the COG retreat is scheduled for a different weekend than it normally is, a little bit later in July, July 29th and 30th. So all that information is on page 5 of your board packet. I'd also like to call to your attention, I believe these were at your seat location. We've got this very, very fancy brochure, this booklet. This is something that's been produced by COG staff, and it is our Unified Planning Framework for 2030, which is now being branded as Region United. Region United. And here we go. We've got this wonderfully well-produced but informative brochure which outlines all of our key priority areas and provides a great introduction to this work, not only for your own benefit, but as you're sharing it with others, it's really a good primer for what we're doing here. And, of course, for all of you who are attending in person, it's yours to take home. You've got this nice glossy brochure for yourself. For those who are participating virtually, don't fret. We will mail you one, provided you send a self-addressed stamped envelope. Make sure it's oversized with sufficient postage. Send it to Pat Warren. She'll make sure you get one. I'm kidding. We'll eat the cost. If COG goes into deficit because you didn't show up today, that'll be on your conscience. All right, so let's see. We also have, in addition, some enhancements to the COG website, which includes presentations by Executive Director Bean as well as other COG staff. And, you know, collectively, we hope these materials will address one of the goals that we determined in January when we set our work plan for the year, and that is to make sure that this planning framework is effectively communicated throughout the region, among interested parties and the general public. You may also recall that in January, Vice Chair Stewart announced an upcoming regional racial equity learning series for elected officials. And so today, if you're willing, we'd love to have an update on that work.
Thank you very much. At your seat, you also have a flyer for the racial equity. Had to delay because of COVID and some other issues with scheduling, but we are glad to announce that we have dates for the workshop. You'll see we will kick off on May 20th at 9:30 a.m. You'll see there's an asterisk next to this workshop date because if you decide to do the full series, we ask that you attend that one and then do the full series. The May 20th date is also open to people who just want to do that first day to kind of get a good basis on racial equity, on the principles and the foundations of it. But we hope folks will register for the full series. This is educational workshop for elected officials at COG, and there will be more information provided by the staff, but we're very excited to have this kicked off on May 20th, and I just want to thank the entire task force that worked on this with us and the COG staff for putting it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Stewart. Such important work. I know from doing this work in our own community that it is deeply edifying to engage in, but also becomes deeply challenging, particularly as you get into making transformative changes in your community. So I am just really thrilled with your leadership to provide the level of support for elected officials to really do this work meaningfully. Okay, let's see. I think that's all I have on my side, and I'm now ready to turn to Mr. Bean for his Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Picking up on the Region United, the Metropolitan Planning Framework remarks that you had, I want to thank Prince George's County Council Chair Hawkins for an invitation to address the Prince George's County Council last week. I think it was about a 3-hour dialogue on the topic, so it was great to go in depth. I think I have the opportunity to go to Manassas Park for a similar dialogue, hopefully next week. Talking to outside groups, Society of Military Engineers, but doing the work to permeate through COG's infrastructure, and have had presentations and dialogues with the regional chief equity officers and with the regional planning directors committee on the Metropolitan Planning Framework. Just a reminder that our focus is on these 4 elements. So last month it was focusing on the housing targets, this month on the climate goals. Next month, plans to optimize land use around high-capacity transit station areas. And then in May, the board meeting will be on accelerating action on equity emphasis areas. So all 4 working together. All four are interrelated, so even though we may be talking about climate particular initiatives today, when we put more housing closer to jobs, closer to transit, we're not only accomplishing some socioeconomic and transportation goals, we're also accomplishing some transportation goals. So in terms of accelerated action, COG has a few technical assistance planning grants programs. One is the Housing Affordability Planning Program. This is funded by Amazon, and applications are due this month, March 23rd. I want to highlight the Think Regionally podcast with Robert McCartney. This month focuses on the 2030 housing targets. Thank you, Mayor Wilson, for lending your voice to this podcast. I'm not sure if Mr. McCartney is with us today, but he is, the next podcast will be focusing on the topic that we're taking up today, our climate initiatives. I'd like to introduce to you once again our IT Director, Lionel Bernard. And Lionel, if you could give shout outs to your IT team. It's 2 years shy of 2 days that we had our last in-person COG board meeting together, and it was Lionel's team that kept our COG staff productive, but also protected throughout these last 2 years. So Lionel, could you give the shout out to your team?
All right, well, thanks, Chuck, for recognizing the IT team, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and board members. COG's IT team has 3 priorities. First, to ensure that our IT services are available, that they're reliable, and that they're secure from cyber threats. The last 2 years of COVID and having our entire COG staff working remotely posed an immense challenge to IT services delivery here at COG. Our small but capable IT team was able to overcome these challenges and even make significant improvements to our IT services. These improvements include implementing new telework and virtual phone systems to enable our staff to have a more productive remote work experience. We're also able to upgrade COG's hybrid meeting capabilities. And lastly, over the past 2 years, we've managed to troubleshoot and resolve over 1,700 IT support requests from our staff. But please allow me to introduce our IT team. Rizwan Ahmad, who's our help desk technician. And Rizwan is responsible for supporting in-person, virtual, and hybrid meetings. He also provides troubleshooting support to IT staff on issues. He's responsible for provisioning laptops and desktops to staff, as well as managing all IT assets. Leon Churong, who's our network engineer, and Leon is responsible for supporting telework systems, virtual phone systems, as well as all COG meetings. Jose Limas, who you see right next to me here, is also our network engineer and handles IT administration. He's responsible for helping staff with IT issues, IT procurement, vendor management, and he also manages our data center. Dominic Richardson, our cybersecurity engineer, is responsible for all cybersecurity issues, cloud infrastructure support, as well as server support. Robert Francois, our cloud engineer, is responsible for cloud migration, cloud infrastructure, data analysis. And last but not least, myself, Lionel Bernard, Director of IT. I must also note that the room that we're currently in is in the process of being fully modernized with upgraded audiovisual equipment. So hopefully by this summer, this room will look quite different. Thank you.
We could just pause and give a round of applause
Absolutely.
to that team. I would really appreciate it. Thank you, Lionel. A highlight on a very special meeting last week. This is with HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge. The meeting was called the day after the President's State of the Union address, and this was spearheaded by Craig Rice, Montgomery County Council member, via his leadership in NACO, National Association of Counties, hosted in Prince George's County by County Executive Alserbrooks, and included County Executive Elrich and COG Chair Dorsey, Chair Randall, Commissioner Collins, Chair Wheeler, and Supervisor Walkinshaw. Opportunity to build on connections between HUD and local governments and COG. I think Mr. Chairman and other members that were there, if you'd like to say a word or two about that meeting, I think others would appreciate that. And to conclude my report, I'm happy to answer any questions about my verbal report. My written report begins on page 7 of the board packet or other COG matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bean. So 3 things. First, Mr. Bernard, and to your team, very glad that we could have this opportunity to know all of the members of the team and to acknowledge your work over the last couple of years. You know, IT is just a modern form of the infrastructure that makes all of our communities work. We tend not to think about it until it doesn't work, and then everybody cares immensely. But for us to go over these last 2 years and have such a seamless integration into the virtual world required a heck of a lot of innovation, probably a lot of after-hours troubleshooting, and we very much appreciate your making it easy for us to continue to do our work. So I'm thrilled that this was a part of your report, Mr. Bean. As it relates to the forum or the meeting that we had with Secretary Fudge, I'll just provide some brief comment and then invite colleagues who attended to do the same. It was really nice to be able to, one, be welcomed into Prince George's County in one of their newer affordable multifamily development communities. It's always great to see how those projects materialize. For me being a Virginian, getting a chance to see it done in Maryland. But as to the substance of the conversation, it's just really great having an agency that's receptive to partnering with communities who really want to do something in the affordable housing space versus being left to your own devices. And while I would love to be able to announce that there were some transformative commitments that will really help us plus up in the region, that didn't happen, but I have every expectation that with some of our work, it can happen, which is a stark change from where we were before. Anyone else? Do we have any questions for other, Chair Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I thought the meeting was really helpful, and truthfully, it's not every day that you get a secretary, U.S. secretary, a member of cabinet calling you to ask local elected officials what their ideas and opinions are. So just that in itself was very impressive. I do think there were some things that we haven't talked about in a long time that were really important. One thing Secretary Fudge has always focused on is fair housing. And when you discuss fair housing as it relates to accessible housing, that's always important because there are times people don't have housing because fair housing laws are violated. And so to have a reminder that you can't discriminate people because of family size and things like that were really very important. There was also one program, it was called House America, that Loudoun was not doing in our county, and it was the first time I heard of that. So I brought it back to our county staff, and they took a look at that. And then also just hearing from my colleagues across the jurisdiction, because this is a regional issue, and we know that. We've discussed that for a long time. And so although there may not have been something new for everyone, I think a lot of people in the room found something new for them that their county was not doing, either in a program or in zoning or in some other space that if they took back to their county could positively impact their ability to do more accessible housing. So overall, it was a really, really very good meeting, and I appreciated NACO, I appreciated COG, and I appreciate the Secretary joining us for that meeting, or pulling together that meeting. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Randall, indeed. And are there any other questions for Mr. Bean on his report? Seeing none, we'll move with some of the administrative items on our agenda. Are there any proposed amendments to our agenda today? All right, seeing none, we'll move right into item number 5, which is consideration of the minutes from our February 9th meeting.
Move approval, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, Ms. Gross, for moving approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by, I heard Mr. Hawkins first. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Oh, I should recognize, are there any abstentions that would like to be recognized? Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anyone else? All right, the ayes have it, and the minutes are approved with the noted abstention. We'll now move to our consent agenda, which has one item for our consideration today. It's Resolution R-17-2022, which authorizes COG to receive a grant, procure, and enter into a contract to conduct, it's not a typo, Phase 37 of the Continuous Airport System Planning Program. This is about a $306,000 grant. COG is required to provide a 10% match, which we do have in our available transportation funds, and I'll accept a motion to adopt. So moved by Ms. Gross. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Lusk. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it, and that resolution is adopted. We'll now move to item 7, our first substantive item on our agenda today, our regional climate goals. And our course, as has been our custom for these last couple of months, we're going to devote our meetings to getting deep into one of our priority issue areas. Today, of course, is climate, and we're going to begin with Deputy Executive Director for Metropolitan Planning, Kanti Shrikant, to brief us on the region's 2030 climate goals and the regional and local level action related to COG's 2030 Climate and Energy Action Plan. Excuse me. Mr. Shrikant, are you ready to go?
Yes, sir.
The floor is yours.
Yes, I'm waited 2 years for this. So. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. We are very glad to be part of this continuing deep dive into the various elements of the Metropolitan Washington Planning Framework. So following last month's deep dive into housing, I will get us started today on the other element, climate change. I said get us started because that is what is on the agenda is that we will be hearing about climate change activities from 2 of our member jurisdictions, Loudoun and Montgomery counties. Following that, we will hear from your staff, Jeff King, who directs COG's climate program, about a couple of opportunities for regional collaboration as we proceed into this important work. So now, just brief recap of the region's short-term climate change goals. We want to reduce greenhouse gases to 50% of its 2005 levels by 2030. We also want to become a climate resilient ready region by 2030. But importantly, we want to ensure that all of this climate and resiliency actions we take are done equitably. So our short-term goals for 2030, which is 50% below 2005 levels, is part of the region's more comprehensive set of climate change goals. The region has a goal for 2020, and that was to be 20% below 2005 levels. We almost made it. So, we probably, the numbers are going to be finalized fairly soon, but we are likely going to be missing it by 1 or 2%. So that's good news. So this indicates that we as a region are indeed on the right track, but it also indicates that we will have to step it up, right? We will also need to do this stepping up of our actions taken more expeditiously, since our next goal for 2030 is not far off. If we are at about 18% today, getting to 50% in 8 years is going to take all of us working collaboratively and as expeditiously. And getting the 2030 goal is important because the 2050 is a much higher goal. We want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to 80% below 2005 levels, right? So between now and 2050, the region is expecting to have its population grow by 26%, 23%, to have its employment grow by 26%. We want that growth, but we want to do it in an environmentally sustainable manner. So we know we can attain our 2030 goal. Why? Because we examined a whole bunch of strategies, we analyzed them, and we documented those strategies in what the COG board adopted, the 2030 Climate Energy Action Plan. While there are many ways to reduce greenhouse gases, the sectors with the most potential to reduce greenhouse gases and the types of actions within those sectors are detailed in the Climate Action Plan, and they are highlighted here in this slide, but I won't review all of them. Particularly, the strategies and the sectors include the source and the type of energy we use. It also includes the things that use this energy, particularly our commercial and residential buildings, and of course, transportation, which uses so much of the fossil fuel. So these are the main sectors, and there are some great strategies in there that will help us get to the 2030 goal. So as such, our action plan focused on these sectors only, and it is calling for substantive actions collaboratively and, as always, equitably. So the good news is that all of you, COG members, have been working on this, and COG staff has been collaborating with other committees here at COG and with the staffs of your agencies. For example, immediately after COG board adopted the Climate Action Plan in November of 2020, the Transportation Planning Board initiated in 2021, January, a climate change mitigation study, purely focusing on the specific strategies that can be taken within transportation to reduce greenhouse gases. That study was completed in December. Currently, the Transportation Planning Board is engaged in a discussion about which of those strategies they could adopt as planning priorities while we make our transportation investment decisions in the coming years. Similarly, the federal government has all of its military bases throughout the nation work with the communities and local governments to determine what resiliency gaps are identifiable within the immediate community and to work to address them. At the local levels, we have also begun completed many climate action plans, energy sustainability plans. There has been joint procurement of solar. Building energy efficiency standards are being worked on, and certainly, as Chuck alluded, more housing near transit stations. And there has also been significant investments in transit. So these are some of this work that's already underway. There are a variety of local actions being taken. It'll be really hard to display all of them on a slide. So I'm displaying here just two types of activities. As these activities represent a broad spectrum of strategies that cover a lot of potential greenhouse gas reduction actions. As of today, we are aware of at least 8 members working or having recently completed jurisdiction-level multi-sector climate and energy action plans. While the COG climate action plan was at a regional level, these jurisdiction-specific plans are important as they are customized and they reflect strategies that are most promising and importantly viable at the jurisdiction to the specific jurisdiction. We are also aware of at least 5 jurisdictions working on electric vehicle strategy, and those strategy plans address both the vehicle side of it and the infrastructure needed to support the operations of these vehicles. I think it would be great to have all 23 member jurisdictions in the COG area develop these sorts of blueprints or climate action plans. And today we are going to hear about 2 such climate action plan efforts from 2 of our members. We will first hear from Mark Aveni, Loudoun County's Assistant Director of General Services, and then from Adriana Hartberg, Montgomery County's Acting Director of Department of Environmental Protection. Mark will discuss the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors initiative that established a Big Tent Climate Commission with representatives from public utilities, Loudoun public schools, subject matter experts, nonprofits, at-large residents. In other words, to look at it from a community holistic perspective, recognizing that every action will need resources and it will need contributions from every sector. Adriana will share the recently completed climate action plan of Montgomery County that is not only, at least in my view, very ambitious, it also seeks to be zero emissions by 2035. And it is a plan that very importantly centralizes racial equity and social justice. It didn't start with what strategies we implement to reduce greenhouse gases, but it started with acknowledgement that the impacts of climate change are inequitable to begin with. So following those 2 presentations, COG staff Jeff King will identify a couple of opportunities in the 3 specific areas where members can work collectively, like you all are already doing with regards to housing affordability. With that, I will hand it over to Mark Avini from Loudoun County.
All right, so as we do a little table shifting, let's see if there are any questions for Mr. Shrikant. Conti, don't go too far yet, as you did the level setting. Very much appreciate that. Are there any questions for Mr. Shrikant? Actually, I have one, just sort of housekeeping one. So there's a slide, this supporting local climate energy action slide that appeared in our read-ahead packet as well as on the WebEx is just a little different than what we're seeing on our screen right now. Are they conveying the same information, or are there any nuances we should take note of?
No, I think they're generally communicating the same information. We are working to have a detailed table of all the various activities at other member jurisdictions. We have tried to highlight just a couple of them.
Got it. Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Ms. Gross. I was going to reserve my question until I spoke with you personally, but as a result of COVID-19 and our virtual working experience, are you all considering how that's impactful to the climate network discussion, climate change discussion?
Yes. At COG, we have started doing a couple of things. Immediately, well, I would say around March, April of 2020, we started monitoring a number of trends in the region to assess how COVID is impacting during the pandemic, and we are still not out of the pandemic period. So that monitoring continues. We are monitoring what has happened on the economic side, what has happened to the jobs. We have also started monitoring what is happening on the roadway systems, whether it is traffic volumes. We have started monitoring what is happening on the transit ridership. And we've also, using that information, we've been estimating what has been the change in emissions in our region, both to greenhouse gases and to criteria pollutants. That is during the period. The question then becomes, what will the new normal be? How will the changes in travel and the amount of travel and the pattern of travel, how will it evolve? How much of that will sustain? And then how will the use and space utilization of commercial buildings affect? So those are things that we will have to continue to monitor, and all of those will have, to some degree or the other, an impact on climate change for sure.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Mr. Schneider.
Sure. So one of the obvious questions is the effect of the Russia-Ukraine war, the sanctions, the cost of motor fuels, gasoline, and the public reaction to all of that. So can COG help us monitor the impacts of that and how best we respond on behalf of our citizens? Thank you.
The answer is yes. I think, as Mr. Srikant, we've been monitoring the energy usage over the last 2 years, and whether hopefully this is a short-term phenomena or this is longer-term, that we will be monitoring it. And if this is a segue to looking more intensively at less dependency on certain energy types, this may also be an opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schneider. All right, seeing no other questions, we're now excited to move on to the next item, hearing from the local jurisdictions about their climate and energy action planning efforts. We are pleased to be joined today by Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection Acting Department Director Adriana Hochberg and Loudoun County Assistant Director of General Services Mark Avini, who will brief us on their experiences in coming up with their plans and give us a taste of where their jurisdictions are headed. And after, of course, we'll engage in discussion among the board. in response to what we've heard and some other ideas about what we may do as a jurisdiction. So with that, I think every context clue I am divining says Mr. Avini is going to go first, and so I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Dorsey, members of the COG Board. I am Mark Avani with Loudoun County, Virginia, Department of General Services. I'm here to talk to you today about the Environmental Commission that we've established in Loudoun County. I do want to recognize our Chair Randall and Supervisor Briskman, who were instrumental in setting up this Environmental Commission. This commission was established in December of 2020. There are detailed bylaws, which have been very helpful, certainly to me, in running this commission, and you can see some of the specific language that is in the bylaws, which really forms what the Environmental Commission does. In a nutshell, they are to come up with some environment and sustainability ideas for the board to consider. They're also supposed to get public input and vet these ideas before we come to the board. There's 17 members that were appointed by the board for 4-year terms. It's a very diverse group. You heard Canty talk a little bit about there's members from individual districts, there's members representing public utilities, the schools, underrepresented audiences, a very diverse group. If you notice, there's 2 asterisks down there at the very bottom, and I just want to point this out as being very helpful from a standpoint of doing a commission at the local level. I'm in the Department of General Services, which is perhaps where you wouldn't think you would put an environmental commission, but having an environmental commission located within a department gives a lot of advantages. You're among the folk, if you will, and so you're with other staff members who can advise us on different ideas and initiatives that the commission has and whether they make sense. It's also very helpful to me to reach out to other departments and other staff members to say, hey, do you think this idea works? Not to say that you couldn't do an environmental commission directly reporting to a board or reporting to a county exec, but in this particular instance, having staff located right in a department works very well. We also were fortunate to get budgeted staff person in our office in general services that can help with minutes and coordinations and liaison. This group has been very busy. I started in July, and the first thing I did was to just call the members and introduce myself and really just ask them what their interest was. What themes did they have for an environmental commission? This was very useful to me because it helped form where we should go. Obviously, when you have a lot of very involved citizens and representatives, they want to talk, they want to introduce themselves. We have been meeting every 2 weeks since July, and that is a pretty aggressive schedule, but I think it's been helpful because we've been able to develop some pretty good themes. We had 1 virtual public input session in November of 21 that we did in cooperation with our Public Affairs Office. We had 80 online comments and 12 speakers that gave us a lot of input. From all those things, we have developed 5 themes, and those themes are up on the screen there. These are, I think, are very good themes that you've certainly heard before, but this is how we're focused: sustainable energy, natural resource protection, environmental justice, public engagement, and my favorite, government by example. So with these 5 themes, we're now developing, and I won't read all these because I know time is of essence, but for all these different initiatives, we're developing some what we like to call actionable items. We certainly hear a lot of broad, lofty goals, and those are well and good and important, but obviously at the local level, we want to see some action. Data centers figure very prominently in Loudoun County, as you know, and there's been a lot of talk about what we might do to reduce the fossil fuel usage. A lot of talk of how we practically increase solar power in Loudoun County, and then reduce energy usage in our own buildings that Loudoun County manages. Natural resources, always an important component. We're looking at how we promote our healthy watersheds, how we make environmental information more available to the public so they don't have to go and search for it, but there's a dashboard, if you will, where they can easily see indicators such as tree canopy, impaired streams, as well as positive things as well. And then there was some talk about updating our land management policies. Environmental justice, certainly a topic that we're all talking about. We have identified this as energy equity and how we might provide some assistance to these what we call areas of opportunity. One of the things I love about working with local folks is you get some really good practical examples, and you'll see some of the examples that they've come up with is how do we help assist people with solar panels, how do we do home weatherization, how do we make used electric vehicles more affordable with rebates, community solar, and EV charging in multifamily housing. So some very practical ideas have come forward from this group and the public. And then lastly, doing some outreach for more input on these goals. Public engagement, always important. In the bylaws, it specifically states that the Environmental Commission will conduct Environmental Excellence Awards. We're excited about doing that with the group you see there. A lot of talk about inviting broad public input into our goals. That's certainly something that I know the board is interested in, and we're talking about hosting a first-ever energy and environment public forum, and we've done a lot of interaction with groups as diverse as HOAs, developers, and the agricultural community. And then lastly, for public engagement, we obviously want to remember our non-English speaking, our over 55 communities, higher education institutions, and nonprofits. These are the groups that will help us achieve the goals that the Environmental Commission and the board ultimately wants us to do. Government by example, we're currently working with COG on an energy plan for Loudoun County, our first since 2009, so we're excited to update that. We're looking at what we do with our energy and how we manage our buildings so that we are more sustainable and we will be an example to others. Again, some very practical ideas, just you know, when no one's in the building, the lights should be off. You know, who would think? Water bottle refills, some very basic ideas as well as some broader ideas. And then some landscape management that we can do at the county level as well. But the big question is now what? So as a result of all this, we have developed 10 proposals that we're going to be taking to the board later in the year to discuss these issues and get direction from the board. We're currently talking with staff in other departments because, as you would imagine, a lot of these go with building and development, planning and zoning, housing, parks, and so we want to talk to those other departments and make sure that they like these ideas, that they're supportive of these ideas, and they help us form these ideas. We are developing those proposals, and we're looking forward to getting in front of the board sometime later this year, obviously for their input and their direction. You see some ideas there that we have come up with and we are fully forming. I think these are pretty significant ideas at the local level, how we do a better job with tree protection, how we define and create wildlife corridors. Interesting fact, Loudoun County is #1 for deer vehicle collisions, so looking at a way that wildlife can move safely across roadways without obviously hitting cars is something that we're interested in. Making our data more available to the public, evaluate some existing watershed management plans that have really been sitting on a shelf and seeing if there's any in there that we might implement jointly with HOAs, for example. Expanding our solar in residential areas as well as utility scale so we have more renewable energy usage. And then the last 5 is to better define energy equity, look for areas of opportunity. We are considering a feasibility study if the board is interested in a Loudoun County Green Bank. We are right in the middle of a feasibility study for a community choice aggregation for Loudoun. We'll be going to the Finance Committee in April to discuss that more fully. And as I mentioned, we're developing an energy strategy for government by example and conducting environmental program awards. So we've done a lot, Mr. Chair and members of the board, within not even quite a year. And we're very proud of the work that we've done. Just a few ideas to leave you with that must consider. Obviously, we need to be conscious of freedom of information and conflict of interest rules. 3 members makes a public meeting, so we talk to our commission members that they need to be careful if they, you know, gather, they can only be 2 of them. Certainly, we've all struggled with in-person versus electronic meetings and meeting management and all of these kinds of things. But all those are ideas that we've, I think, handled pretty well so that we can get that information out there and work with it. I do want to point out a few final thoughts. This is a high-touch effort. I am on the phone every day with a commission member, a department member, a nonprofit, somebody who wants to know what we're doing, how the Environmental Commission can work with them. And that's important. It's not an effort that is done from afar. It's an effort that's, you just dive right in and do it. I've met with people for breakfast, I've met with people for lunch, I've met with people for dinner. So certainly there's a lot of interaction to do this right. Staffing, as I've said, at the department level certainly gives a lot of credibility to an effort because it's coming from the actual people that would have to implement that. Broad participation goes without saying. You've got to get a lot of different opinions to really form something that represents the community. We're obviously always sensitive to not get in front of our board. The board is the final say. They make the decisions, sometimes with appointed bodies. They get a little ahead of themselves, and they think they're the experts, and they are in many ways. And they and so sometimes I have to play the bad guy and say, no, you know, we're not going to get ahead of the board. The board will opine on whether they think that's a good idea. And it's usually all well and good, but you do need to kind of, you know, work things very carefully to keep them from getting out of hand. And finally, I would just say, ladies and gentlemen, that working for government all these years, this is an example of how government should work. And what I mean by that is, here you've got a board appointing representatives, citizens, subject matter experts to look at an issue with bylaws that say, come to us with recommendations for natural resources and sustainability. You all do that work and come to us. And so we're doing that work. And then we're coming to the board and we're saying, here's what they said. And now staff has looked at it and said, you know, here's what we might do. Do you want us to do this? If so, here's what it will take for funding. Here's what it will take for staffing. I believe that's an excellent way for government to work, because it comes from the people and then eventually goes in front of the decision makers who are accountable to say, yes, we want to do this, or no, we don't want to do it. So I'm very pleased to be a part of this. I'm very happy to be here today talking to you about it. You know, I'm sensitive to time, but my contact information is on there. I'd love to come back to you in a year and tell you where we are, and that's my report today, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Avini. And we'll, if you could hold your questions that you may have for Mr. Avini until after we hear from Ms. Hochberg, I'd appreciate it, and then we can do everything collectively. And with that, now I'd like to reintroduce Acting Department Director for Montgomery County's Environmental Protection Department, Ms. Adriana Hochberg.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I'm Adriana Hochberg, Acting Director in the Department of Environmental Protection in Montgomery County, and I also serve as the county's Climate Change Officer. I'm grateful to be here today to share our work with you. In particularly, I'll be focusing my remarks on how our efforts to integrate racial equity and social justice into our climate planning effort. Climate change, I would say, is the issue of our time, but it's more than an issue just about numbers and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's an issue of our communities and how do we prioritize our community members as we go about implementing climate action. I'm going to be sharing with you both where I think we did well in terms of incorporating racial equity and social justice in our work, as well as some examples of where I think we've struggled, because I want to be honest with you, and this work is not perfect. It's a work in progress, and I want to be able to share our lessons learned so that it can help you in your own jurisdictions. And I'll just say that I have a lot of information on my slides. I will not be going over every single slide. I do believe you have them in your packet to refer to as well. I will be primarily speaking to how we endeavor to include racial equity and social justice in the planning process of our climate action plan, how we incorporated racial equity and social justice in the plan document itself, and now how we're implementing climate action with a racial equity and social justice lens. So when our climate planning process kicked off in July of 2019, and also like to take a moment to recognize County Executive Elridge, who championed our efforts to get the climate planning process off the ground. County Executive recognized that we have a lot of climate and energy experts in the county, and so our very first step was to put the word out to our community to solicit volunteers to participate in the climate planning process. And so we put out press releases, we got the word out, we got hundreds of members of our community interested in participating in our work groups. And it was amazing. They came together, they developed close to 900 recommendations for the county to consider. However, when we sat around the room with these folks, and this was pre-COVID, so we were able to meet in person, and we looked around the room, the membership of our work groups did not reflect the rich diversity in our county. And something that we recognized was a little bit belatedly was that because we were seeking volunteers and we were seeking people who had, the social capital and the time capital to, participate in these very long extended volunteer processes, not all members of the community have the luxury of time and the ability to travel to Rockville or to Silver Spring and participate actively. And so we were missing from the table many diverse voices. And so we endeavored, subsequently to the climate planning process getting underway, to include more diverse voices from our community in the planning process in a couple of ways. First, the very early days of COVID, we solicited the help of a number of high school and college students. We prioritized them based on their zip code in terms of areas of the county that have historically been undercounted in the census. And we solicited their help. They served as, we call them as resilience ambassadors, to survey and connect with members of their neighborhoods and their extended networks and to help inform the climate action plan. And so they collectively collected 130 surveys that informed our plan. We not only compensated the resilience ambassadors for their time, we also compensated the members of the community who completed the surveys for us. And then additionally, we held a number of racial equity and social justice workshops with about 20 community-based organizations in the county to help review those early results of those hundreds of recommendations that had come out of the climate planning process and help us identify blind spots that may have been missed earlier in the process. And I'm skipping ahead a little bit here in the slides. I want to focus on a couple of examples of how we incorporated racial equity and social justice in the plan itself. The first is that the plan includes a chapter on racial equity and social justice, and it helps to provide the historical context as well as summarize current conditions related to systemic racism and environmental injustices in the county, particularly related to housing and home ownership, transportation, and energy. And as part of the climate planning process, we also developed some maps. The one on the left reflects the CDC Social Vulnerability Index. Those are 15 different factors of social vulnerability, including poverty level, members of our community who are Black, Indigenous, or other people of color, disability, lack of high school diploma, and so on. We felt it was important to visually identify locations in the county that are most at risk to social vulnerabilities, because those are the members of our community who are also going to be the most impacted by climate change. The map on the right reflects census tracts in the county that have the highest energy burden as a percentage of their monthly take-home income. And so the idea with these maps is that, as we move forward towards implementing the plan, we want to be able to prioritize our climate efforts on the ground in these areas of the community who are most in need. Something that we incorporated throughout the climate action plan is what we call equity enhancing measures. The equity enhancing measures identified the racial equity and social justice implications of each climate action and identified specific actions that need to be taken so that when we're implementing a specific climate action, we're doing so in a way that addresses these inequities. So as an example, the Climate Action Plan calls for the development and implementation of a community choice energy program in the county that's also known as community choice aggregation. Montgomery County was authorized by the General Assembly last year to establish a community choice energy pilot program. And so to ensure that as we implement community choice energy in Montgomery County, we're doing so in an equitable way, we need to make sure that we identify any cost impacts to low and moderate income residents from having additional renewable energy in the mix. So that was one of the equity enhancing measures that was identified here for this action. As well as when we are in the process of developing outreach materials related to community choice energy, we need to develop an awareness campaign in multiple languages so that members of the community are aware of the program offerings. So this example here is from the Community Choice Energy Action, but each of the 86 actions in the Climate Action Plan also include something along these lines that's tailored to that particular action. So how are we implementing the Climate Action Plan with a racial equity and social justice lens? Here are a few examples of some things that we have underway right now. The first one is a countywide application of racial equity and social justice impact statement for all council bills. This is not specific to the Climate Action Plan. This is an effort that was championed by Councilmember Navarro, and so all council legislation bills have to undergo a racial equity and social justice impact statement review. That is a written product that's developed by the Office of Legislative Oversight, and it identifies the anticipated impacts on racial equity and social justice of that given legislative action, and makes a determination of whether that legislative action would have a favorable or unfavorable impact on racial equity and social justice. Something else that we have underway right now is the development of a high road economic inclusion strategy that is looking at both the workforce development as well as business development and anchor strategy framework for how we can begin to integrate the county's economic strategy with climate action. This effort already identified that each year between now and 2050, the undertaking climate action in Montgomery County is going to lead to new jobs, between 2,600 and 3,300 jobs annually in the county. And so we are trying to identify what are the ways that we can ensure that these jobs connect with residents in the county who are in need of those jobs, as well as how do we prioritize small businesses and provide them with opportunities to participate in the climate economy. One of the actions in the Climate Action Plan that we're in the process of developing right now is what we call the Community Justice Academy. And this is an effort whereby we will be compensating members of our community in frontline communities and neighborhoods to help co-design and co-create with the county solutions that make sense to their own neighborhoods. And we want to be able to not only compensate the community members for their time and expertise, as well as compensate the community-based organizations and to be able to provide some seed funding for those projects to move forward. So in conclusion, I'll just share a few final observations. The first one, as I just mentioned, that it's important to compensate not only underserved members of the community, but also those community-based organizations that represent them in order for them to meaningfully be able to engage in this work. It's also important to use language that connects to members of the community. These issues are important to them, but sometimes the language that we use in the climate world can be off-putting, can be very jargony. So we need to be very aware of that. And finally, this goes a little bit above or beyond just the confines of the Climate Action Plan, but I think it's very important for us to diversify the ranks of people who are working on climate. And one small step that we are taking in that direction is that in Montgomery County, we now have paid climate internships that serves as a pathway to bring on board more diverse young members of our community who are joining us in this work so that we can train the next generation of climate leaders. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hochberg, and also Mr. Avini, and we do have some time for some questions. Hopefully we're able to see, colleagues, that through this peer learning series, we've brought you organizations that are at different places and stages and how they're thinking about the environmental and climate work. I don't mean to describe for you where you are, but at least what I heard from Mr. Avini is that Loudoun County is at the organizing and operationalizing stage of thinking about integrating this work within their government, and Montgomery County, may be at a level of detailed planning and trying to integrate other priorities like equity into the work to achieve a cross-cutting effect. So hopefully we've given you a flavor of people at different places and stages and enough opportunities to see things that may be useful for your own jurisdiction. So with that as a preamble, I'm going to turn it over to Supervisor Gross first, and then Supervisor Briskman next, and then Mr. Elridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fairfax County, I think, has been a little bit farther ahead than some other jurisdictions with our community groups and our plans. In fact, at our most recent environmental committee meeting, the handout was 300 pages, and the message from our staff was, we're not handing these out, we're not printing them out. If you want to print one, print it at your own office, so that we have everything online. But and the community piece of it has been really, really helpful. A little hard to get everybody lined up, especially as we started this just prior to the beginning of COVID, but we were able to make a lot of progress and adopt a plan. My question actually is for you, Mark, and it's nice to see you again. I'm glad to know that you're still involved in environmental activities. We met years and years ago on something similar. But you mentioned solar, and so I know that in Fairfax County, as we were looking at solar, and you may be aware of this, we have the General Assembly to contend with on some of our opportunities, and we had to advocate at the General Assembly level to actually expand solar purchase opportunities with the megawatts and so forth. But there is always that opportunity for the General Assembly to get involved in something locally. And have you, maybe your group is a little too new to have experienced that, but have you considered what you need to do with the General Assembly in Virginia? This is Virginia focused only. What you need to do with the General Assembly to accomplish some of your goals, because I know that's been a challenge for us.
Thank you, Supervisor Grossman. It's nice to see you again as well. Yes, there are a lot of issues with solar, both at the residential level and the utility scale level that are frankly not allowed per the General Assembly. And so we are finding out some struggles there. And we're trying to do what we can locally without having to involve the General Assembly. But some of our recommendations to the board might actually include General Assembly action, to your point, things that aren't allowed currently. That hinder our ability to use this as a renewable energy source.
Well, I appreciate that, because I think that too often we wait until, late in the fall or just prior to the General Assembly session, because our General Assembly only meets 2 months out of the year, fortunately. And so we really have to start that advocacy with the individual members well in advance, and that's a challenge once you get down there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gross. Ms. Briskman.
Thank you, Chair. And is it Ms. Mochenberg? I can't.
Hochberg.
Hochberg. Okay, great. Thank you so much for your presentation. A couple things jumped out at me. When you say that I have two questions. There's a legislative review. Is that a legislative review of sort of overall countywide policy, for example, or is that also a legislative review of every land use application? So that's my first question, like how deep does that go? And then secondly, the Community Justice Academy, is that just for the climate initiatives, or is that throughout the county and where they could do their work? Thank you.
Sure. So to answer your first question, the Office of Legislative Oversight reviews all pending bills that are before council with that racial equity and social justice lens. I believe that also major budget decisions are also reviewed through that lens, as well as county master plans. So it's a variety of different county policies, not just bills. And then
can I add? I'm sorry.
Hold on 1 second, Ms. Navarro. Just 1 second. That'll be great. Did you finish, Ms. Hochberg?
Yeah, yes, I was just to finish the second part, to answer your second part of your question. So initially, when we were conceptualizing the Community Justice Academy, we were actually calling it the Climate Justice Academy, and then we stepped back and realized that for some people, the issue that they care the most about may actually be transportation safety or public safety, and so we did not want to narrow it too much. And so the idea is that it will enable members of the community to prioritize issues that are important to them, community issues, not necessarily narrowly focused on climate.
Fascinating. Thank you. I think that we could learn a lot. Thank you.
All right. Generally speaking, folks who are on the WebEx, we will come to you for questions and comments after recognize those in the room, but I suspect that Ms. Navarro is someone for whom this was a principal passion on the council, may have something to add to this particular response. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. It's not just a passion. I was the author of the legislation, so I just wanted to clarify that the legislation requires equity impact note, also for zoning text amendments, in addition to all pieces of legislation, as well as budgetary decisions, including school system budget requests and some other types as needed. So I I just wanted to clarify that, Mr. Chairman, since somebody had asked that particular question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, Mr. Elrich.
I just wanted to point out a couple of things that we started with this plan that I think are important. One is when we convened the group to talk about this, I basically took it out in front. I mean, our approach was lay out the path so that you can get the path, so that people know what it is they have to do. I didn't want to achieve a goal that was so low set that I could achieve it, but know that it wouldn't really alter the trajectory of climate change. And so we wanted to target this extraordinarily difficult to achieve. Our numbers, they're really hard. 2035 to 0, really hard. But this also means our work is difficult. It means no matter what we do, we have to look at what things to do. And I think if we deal with climate change, that's kind of the approach. We have to take this just an option. Because legislative bodies can go through whatever they want, but at the end of the day, we either do this or not. One of the things that we found is that not every answer is that way. But over the last 3 years of doing this, technologies have popped up that weren't there when we started doing this. The change with the availability of technology, for example. Battery prices and ranges, prices have come down, ranges have increased. Transportation solutions, that we said that the technology is not there. We can actually talk about we're electrifying our environment. And we're electrifying all our cars. That's well. We've made these decisions out there, and I think it's worth putting that in. We do need help from the state legislature, even if Maryland is less restrictive. Montgomery County is pilot for community energy. Within 2 years, Montgomery County will buy the electricity for everybody in Montgomery County. If that's a bill written, so you have to opt out, rather than opt in. And that gives us an enormous amount of buying power to a clean energy company that I can offer you everything in the economy. Give you a price that'll make people want to stay in the program. So I feel that it's good to be aggressive, and that one has to have confidence that the things will emerge. Do not feel frustrated because you don't have the answer today. Those solutions are coming, and you should grab the things you can do and prioritize them so they're doable. You're never going to have enough money to go quickly anyway. And that is why I'm going to say the one shortfall that Mr. Price had and everything that goes up with price tag. The city rather than dismissal the price. We put them in there knowing they were going to have to cost that rate because when they're to do some of this stuff, prices will be related.
Great, thank you. Any other questions in the room? Okay, well now, Mr. Lusk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just ask one quick one with regard to the environmental justice for Loudoun County. Just curious, in terms of working with any of the manufactured housing developments in Loudoun, was that a part of the work that you did as well? And then were there any specific recommendations relative to those mobile home properties?
We have not. Oh. We have not. We have talked broadly to some developers about more things that they might do for green housing, but not specific to that type of housing, to trailer parks and so forth.
Because I think for us, I mean, that's a big question in terms of how do we support and help them. In Fairfax County, we have 8 mobile home parks, 2 in Lee, where I represent, and this is a very kind of important issue, and I think for environmental justice, we certainly want to be looking at that as well. So thank you for that answer. And then can I just ask one follow-up? Sorry.
Please.
In regard to the equity enhancing actions, so this is on the Montgomery County, you mentioned that there's going to be a contract with Emerald Cities to develop the 2 components. The one that I'm really interested in, would be happy to maybe if we could see, I guess once you get the report back, is on the jobs. How do we create opportunities to support leveraging folks in our communities who are in the disadvantaged areas, being able to competitively get some of these energy efficiency jobs? So I just would be curious to see what that will look like.
Sure, absolutely. That report, it's being finalized as we speak, and we expect the final report to be available in the next few weeks, so we'll be happy to share that. As part of that report, in developing a kind of a workforce development strategy, they've identified kind of career pathways for how members of the community can get connected to green jobs, no matter where they are, you know, in their career or their education track.
And would, pardon me, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
You're on a roll, Mr. Lusk. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm just thinking out loud here, but obviously the green jobs are really significant and important, but then there are other tech and other types of jobs that could be even connected to this. Is there going to be a look at that as well, or what is your thought?
So what we've been attempting to do is to connect our work here that particularly, you know, looks at, you know, or centralizes climate action and its connection to jobs with the county's overall economic development strategy, which is currently under development. So it's very fortuitous that these things are happening at the same time, and we're looking to integrate climate action into the county's overall, economic development strategy.
All right, thank you. You get 3. Anything more, you need to issue an RFP for her services, all right? So, Ms. Partman, do we have any comments, questions from the WebEx?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I believe Mayor O'Connor had a question or comment, and then Supervisor Bailey.
All right. Mayor O'Connor and then Supervisor Bailey.
Good afternoon. I was interested in hearing from the 2 speakers about the coordination and collaboration in their countywide plans with local municipal governments that may or may not have a municipal sustainability or climate action plan.
Yeah, happy to speak to that. In Montgomery County, we have something that's called the Climate Leadership Team. We meet bi-monthly, and it includes not only directors and staff from across county government departments and agencies, but also municipalities as well, including Tacoma Park, as well as many of the other larger municipalities in the county. It offers us an opportunity to share information, collaborate, you know, work together on this effort. Something that I'm really proud to have worked on, an effort that was recently launched, is the MC4A, which is the Maryland Coalition of Cities and Counties for Climate Action. We are now actively meeting. In fact, we met earlier this morning, and it includes 7 of the largest counties in Maryland, as well as a handful of municipalities from across the state who are collaborating on our policies and advocacy before the General Assembly, as well as working on, you know, peer learning, learning from each other in terms of best practices across our jurisdictions.
Thank you. And Supervisor Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to you as well. And I am so interested in this because Prince William County is really delving into setting up our sustainability, environment and sustainability commissions. And something you said, Ms. Hochberg, at the very end was very interesting to me in terms of what are your recommendations. And Mr. Avini, so good to hear your voice as well. In terms of just keeping next generation, from a generational perspective, keeping next generation involved in this plight, this way ahead, because the sustainability of that in itself will lend to improvements, continuity, enhancements, as we're doing this work that is so uncomfortable for us. Can you offer some recommendations as it relates to equity and generations and going forward? Not to make it long-winded, but I think that's so important in the work that we're doing as it relates to this.
Supervisor Bailey, in Loudoun, we do have a representative from the public school system, and so that, and we have had teachers participate, call in and attend some of our meetings as well. So I see that as a very critical way to involve, as you say, the next generation and get them involved. And the schools have a little bit different interest when it comes to sustainability, so it's always good to get that perspective and hear that perspective.
The youth in Montgomery County are very engaged in climate action. And recently, Montgomery County Public Schools has been really making strides in connecting climate action, within the school system. They recently hosted just last weekend the inaugural Climate Youth Summit. There was a full day of presentation, and that entire summit was developed by students, for students, and very focused on climate actions that students can take in their schools. And also with the climate internships that we offer in the county, it's an opportunity for us to connect with the youth in the county and having them be part of the solution with us.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, one last comment and request.
All right, one more.
Thank you so much, sir. Just in reference to the equity enhancing measures, that is like Supervisor Lusk, something that I would be most interested in terms of, you know, employment and just moving in that way as well and serving our communities. So once those measures are completed, that information is completed, if you could bring that back to us or just provide that to us, it would be most helpful.
Yes, absolutely. I'll be happy to provide a link. That information is part of our climate action plan, which was finalized last June. So I'm happy to share that for you as a reference.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hochberg. And we look forward to following the work both in Montgomery County and Loudoun County and throughout the region, of course, as we do this. We really appreciate your exposing us today to sort of the method behind what you've come up with, some of the growing pains you've learned along the way, but more importantly, the incredible aspirational outcomes you're seeking to achieve. So thank you, Mr. Avini, Ms. Hochberg. We appreciate it very much. We are going to move to our next item, which is going to really build upon the first two and begin to identify opportunities for regional collaboration on climate issues, thinking about not just individual jurisdictions, but how we might work together through COG. And we'll certainly have a presentation, but then, of course, bulk of the time for discussion amongst us to determine maybe some next steps. So for this piece, we're going to turn it over to Jeff King, who is our Climate, Energy, and Air Program Director. He'll begin the presentation that will stoke our discussion.
Thank you, Chair Dorsey. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff King. As was mentioned, it's my pleasure to have the opportunity to present to you today. And you know, as you've heard, and I certainly learned a lot of new things there from our two local speakers there, there's really a lot of exciting leadership and innovation and initiative going on across the region on climate and sustainability, energy innovation, resiliency. And as staff, we really enjoy, you know, coming to work every day, working with your staff and the other stakeholders in the region. You know, clearly so much great work is being done. But, you know, we're in a position now where we're really pivoting from our work on the 2030 Climate and Energy Action Plan development and the actual establishment of the 2030 goal back in 2020 to implementation. And as you heard from County Executive Elrich, you know, clearly a ton of work needs to be done, and as you heard from Mr. Shrikant, not a lot of time to get that work done. And so we're really today looking for your support and your leadership vision on what are some of the things we can do at the regional level. You know, clearly there's a lot of good work going on at the local level, all of this focused on, you know, the energy supply, the building sector, the transportation sector, and we know that we need to take action in all those areas, and a lot of good work is being done. But we really are seeking today to engage with you on, you know, what are some things that really we could leverage at a regional level, do collaboratively together, make more of an impact. And so what we wanted to do today is really tee up three ideas that, you know, we as staff developed as possible ideas to consider for that, but then really turn it over to you for an engaged conversation about what you'd like to see done collaboratively at the regional level. So the first one we have on the screen, you've heard a bit about it, and I'm sure know all sorts of different aspects of it, but the opportunity really to move towards electric vehicles. And I think one of the first things that, you know, we'd like to see is acceleration of that. You know, there's a lot of vehicles on the road, light duty, heavy duty, transit, school buses, you name it, you know, many, many vehicles, and the vast majority are still powered by gasoline and diesel. You know, how can we you know, some of the analysis done here at COG shows that, you know, folks really hang on to their cars for quite some time, you know, 10, 11, 12 plus years. And so if we want to see that shift within our vehicle fleet, how can we accelerate that? So would there be some opportunities, and Conti, I think in this deck has a slide at the end, the federal government with the infrastructure bill, there's a lot of money about to flow towards supporting those types of activities in terms of infrastructure investment and the like. So how can we as a region be a real leader in kind of being ready for that, those opportunities and to capitalize on that? One area to think about is a possible opportunity is the fleets, government fleets, transit buses, school buses, light duty fleets, and even your medium heavy duty. Are there opportunities for us to accelerate the transition of government fleets as kind of a government by example opportunity, and really make some quick progress on changing out from fossil fuel to electric fleets? And then the second piece, as I mentioned, is the electric vehicle infrastructure, the chargers. How can we coordinate better across the region to really understand how to get that charging infrastructure in place, deployed, so that folks feel comfortable that they have, ways to charge the new electric vehicles and the like. And, as part of that, identifying the locations for chargers and to the extent that it's needed, looking at your permitting and zoning processes and coming up with kind of the best practice regionally of what we want to see to make that market accelerate. Let me see if the... Yeah, so I mentioned that we added a slide, and Conti, I don't know if you want to chime in. This is your great work, but this is an overview of the level, the magnitude of potential funding opportunities coming very soon through the infrastructure bill. A lot of focus on vehicles, on chargers. We really want to be in a position to capitalize on that. And so, Conti, did you want to say anything? No.
This is from the 2021 Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, an extract of just the funding flowing through the U.S. Department of Transportation and its agencies in the transportation sector. Right? These are all over 5-year periods. Within the electric vehicle or generally clean fuel, because there are other forms of fuel that are clean as well. These are all brand new programs. I would draw your attention to the carbon reduction program. I mentioned that because earlier Ms. Gross and Mr. Eldridge both alluded to how states need to be a partner with the local governments in doing this. This is the federal government saying they're going to put $6.5 billion for the next 5 years, and they're requiring every state DOT to develop a carbon reduction plan. And that plan should be updated every 4 years. And that plan should be developed in consultation with the metropolitan planning organizations such as the TPB. So there is a 2-year deadline for state DOTs to do that. This is one element of the bipartisan infrastructure law that probably has not caught a lot of attention. There is another $7.5 billion that will go to the state DOTs to help in procuring vehicles and installing EV charging network. This $6.4 billion is outside of that. So in other words, there is close to $14 billion that the federal government is making available. If we can leverage it through creative public-private partnership, through some local funding or some regional funding, there will be resources. And this is one of the areas where we as a region, because it is one thing for each of the 23 member jurisdictions to do their own EV plan, but we know that our residents from one jurisdiction are traveling to another jurisdiction either for job, for commerce, for entertainment, and when they do that, we should have a robust, reliable network where they can get those vehicles charged and would not have to have some sort of an anxiety and refrain from purchasing those sorts of vehicles. So I think at a regional level, and if these are state funds and federal grant funds, the thinking is if the region has a blueprint that this is what we want to implement in our region to be EV ready, we increase our chances of getting federal discretionary grants. The very first Tiger grant that was made available, The region got $59 million by submitting 8 different projects in 8 different jurisdictions, but we stitched them all together with a regional theme, and we got $59 million in grants to do that. Took us a little longer than we anticipated, but we got the money, we got the job done. So that's the idea behind. These are just the new programs. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Kanti. And to add on, last little piece for the EV piece, many of you may know we have entered into agreements with a number of your localities to support either development of climate action plans or electric vehicle plans. We have on call 2 consultant teams that we're able to deploy through task orders. One of the ideas that we've been, and I should say that Frederick County, Prince George's County initially approached us on supporting the electric vehicle plan for government operations for the county. That's been completed. We're about to initiate a planning exercise with Frederick County that's kicking off probably next week. Rockville has indicated they're interested. I've approached Montgomery County because if you think Prince George's and Frederick, what's the big missing puzzle piece? And we know the district has recently done its EV roadmap. Arlington County is working on a roadmap. So I think the call here would be, is there an appetite for more regional collaboration on the EV planning piece? So that's opportunity number 1. Moving to the clean energy piece, we're thinking, one of the things that we're seeing a lot of excitement in across all sectors of the economy is the notion of committing to 100. And there's a number of programs out there where jurisdictions or universities or businesses are making very serious commitments to make sure that they procure, all of the electricity they procure is from green energy sources. And so that potentially will be a very good local government lead by example. We do have a number of jurisdictions in the region already committing to that. And in fact, I think the district even commits to 100 or more than 100%. So they're even offsetting a little. So that's one piece of it, the procurement piece in terms of where you procure your power for your government operations, or even taking it to the next step of, procuring power for your entire community. That's maybe a bit more of a challenge down the road. The other area related to renewables is making commitments to deploy solar on your government buildings. There's all sorts of opportunities to do that, and over the years we have been able to support various local government initiatives to help move that along, including working with folks like Dominion in Virginia to get some policies changed at the state level. Then finally, really working with your residents and business community to incentivize and support installation of solar. So that would be another area of interest. The third that is always on the mind is, we can procure renewables and clean power, but one of the first things you really want to do is try to reduce your energy demand, your load, be more efficient, increase your energy productivity. And so one of the things we've been calling for in our regional initiative over the years is the point number 1 here, local government lead by example of tracking and kind of committing to track and benchmark the energy consumption of all buildings, all government buildings, including schools. In the ideal world, we'd even like to see it the next step where the energy data is shared across a common platform like the EPA Portfolio Manager, so you could really get a real good sense of where you need to focus your attention to improve productivity and the like. We're I would say pretty close to, nearing 100%. Most of the local governments in the region have some form or fashion of tracking energy for their buildings. But I think it's that if we put a little bit more effort to it, we maybe get to that full 100% in a really robust program of tracking energy. There's a couple of folks in the region, D.C. and Montgomery County in particular, looking very closely at building energy performance standards for both your own buildings, but also, commercial buildings. And, the concept here in the district has been, well, first we're going to require buildings like this to benchmark, track energy, and then there'll come a point at which if you're not performing to a certain level, you actually need to then take steps to invest to improve the energy performance of your building. And that type of policy really can drive efficiency investments and create that glide path to reduced consumption of energy. A little bit of a tougher row to hoe on that one, but certainly something to consider if you're looking at your building policy. And then finally, and I know we've been doing this for years, is really looking at how we can support adoption of the most recent building codes. And we know that's particularly difficult in Virginia, given the state controls that. But so with that, just wanted to plant the seed of a few ideas, but I think turning it over to Chuck, I think he really wants to engage with the board to get your good ideas. So thank you.
So thank you, Mr. King and Mr. Srikant. As we look at these three opportunities, and these are three out of several dozen, 35 that are out of the Climate, Energy, and Action Plan. And beyond the Climate, Energy Action Plan, related to our other work, next month we'll be focusing again on high-capacity transit station areas and land use to optimize the access to transit. But these are three out of all those that we selected that seem right, that seem feasible, that seem necessary, and also there's federal funding that like there hasn't been before. So we're teeing this up for your discussion. Is there an appetite to move forward on this? The slide deck that was presented, we will just clean that up and add that additional slide in the follow-up email that will go out to you all this afternoon. So with that, turn it to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bean, and you anticipated one of my asks. And thank you for framing, not only for people in the room, but I know interested parties elsewhere. This is not our considering making these the three priorities in the climate change work. We already have our unified planning framework. We've already got the existing body of work. It's really what have we identified as new opportunities where we can focus engagement to deliver outcomes, more of a strategic approach than a reshifting of the paradigm for what we care about. Clearly, those who are familiar with TPB's climate change mitigation analysis knows that this wouldn't stack up as you do these three things and you're done and solved. Of course not. But these are necessary and important to get to the overall goals that we have. So with that, let's have a discussion. Moderated very little by me, but I do think we should maybe take it one priority at a time. So why don't we just start with EVs, then get into renewables, and then optimizing energy performance. All right, Vice Chair Stewart, Vice Chair Allen, and then I'll see where we go next.
Great, thank you so much for this presentation. I think as Conti said, especially on...
Mayor Stewart, I'm going to make sure your mic is on. That's fine. Okay. Thank you.
Not hearing me? All right. Yes. Thank you so much for the presentation. And as Conti said, particularly on the Western Charger, given that we live in a region where people travel a great deal for work and what it is having a regional map on the state. Some things that we've experienced in Tacoma Park to share with you. We started a project a couple of years ago where residents could use the public right-of-way to install chargers that they didn't have off-street park charging. The issue that residents are running into is a lack of electricians and people to actually do the work. And so as we're looking at public-private partnerships and moving this along, I think that needs to be a piece of how who we partner with, who we think about, are the people who actually do this work and install public chargers. The other thing we have is we work with a local gas station. Convert from gas to EV chargers. This is a great project. It was done through the assistance of our sustainability manager and state grants. But I think this is a great opportunity for others to look at as we're thinking about the future and moving from gas to EV chargers. So just want to say thank you for this. I think it's a great direction to go with, and wanted to share those two experiences.
Yeah, thank you. I think the gas station conversion was probably the first in the region. I recall reading about it. So.
I think it was the first in the country.
Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I absolutely appreciate the comments as well around this will be an ongoing conversation, the inclusion of a lot of the work that was done with TPB. On first glance, that felt like something that was really missing. So I appreciate the fact that that is coming and is going to be incorporated as a full part. So thank you. I guess kind of like when we went through this with TPB, and then when I look at this, I'll be honest, and I don't mean to be a fly in the ointment, I feel a little despondent about how far we have to go, how much we have to challenge ourselves to get there, and, you know, hearing things like, you know, creating energy building standards is too rough of a road to hoe. That concerns me that we're not going to get where we need to go, that we kind of stay in the novelty range and we never actually fully commit to where it is that we have to go. And I'll point the finger right at the district. I mean, we just went through a process where we're purchasing 130 new school buses. 10 of them are going to be electric. That's not moving in the right direction. It is barely a fraction of getting to where we've got to go. And just pointing out that we haven't figured out the EV charging infrastructure as the excuse as to why we're not doing more. The life cycle of a bus is more than a year or two. So we are stuck with that decision now for many years to come. So as we think about this EV shift, I think that is crucial. And I think we have to, I know I'm trying to think about how do I challenge myself, how do I think the district has challenged itself, but regionally, we have to be able to move beyond something that feels like a bit of a novelty into it is what we have to do. And that's where I'm going to try to put my energy and my thoughts is what is it that we have to do from a policy perspective, from an incentive perspective, from just a flat-out requirement perspective. When I think about, you know, from a regional perspective, as much as I want to get everybody, you know, on Metro and out of a vehicle, I know that I'm going to have to build EV charging infrastructure in the district so that colleagues that are coming into the district have a place to charge that vehicle, and we're just not there. And I think that is a place where we can really put a lot of regional muscle behind thinking what this looks like, because building charging infrastructure in the district will be good for our neighbors who are coming in, and it'll be good for district residents. And likewise, when I do get to get out to you guys, having charging infrastructure there is going to be critical. So I think this is a space where we've got to push as hard as we can and not allow ourselves to just keep trying to think about little pilot programs and little things to test if it's possible. It's possible. We just have to do it. And so I really want to take it. I think this is a really great opportunity for us to really challenge ourselves to push as hard as we can, to lean as hard as we can. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you both. All right. I saw Ms. Briskman, and then we'll go to Maryland colleague, Mr. Jordan, and then back to Virginia to Mr. Wolf. Is that whose hand I saw? Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are actually about to approve our CIP in early April. We have a $9 million EV charging station project in there. So if it's one that could be strengthened by partnering it with others, or if we think it might be something that would be a good candidate for one of these grants or something like that, we'd definitely be interested in working with COG on that. Also, I had a meeting earlier this week with IBEW, and they were saying that the projects that you want to propose as candidates for federal funding are strengthened if they have a PLA attached to them. If the jurisdiction has agreed that that particular project would have a PLA, they said that strengthens your application. But they also said, to Mayor Stewart's comment, that having a PLA attached to these projects actually helps us train the electricians and engineers that we need to do the work. So it can, you know, help us in two different ways, I would think. So I haven't quite dug down into how to do that in our jurisdiction. I'd be interested if anyone else has done that in their jurisdiction. But I think it can help solve two different problems. So
I think that's a good point. Coming back to the utility, having the utility companies be part of it. There is currently a program, I think largely supported by utilities, Jeff, that will install free of charge charging stations if any jurisdiction can give them a little bit of space or land to put it on. So clearly they are seeing a business opportunity here as well. So I think those kinds of opportunities, and the Montgomery County School Bus Program, Fairfax County's School Bus Program with Dominion, that's another example of public-private partnership. So I think the market is getting there. I think if we have a robust plan, here is where we need to go, and here is how all of the jurisdictions would be working towards it, which will still allow individual jurisdictions to move at their pace, but we will be able to show a regional blueprint. This is how the National Capital Region will be ready, and when it is ready, it will be robust, reliable. So I think it's a
Yes,
great
and for the record, I would definitely support our group working in that direction or making it one of our priorities, absolutely.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Jordan.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment, a point about the ongoing importance of joint purchasing agreements. When it comes to the electrification of fleets, one of the challenges that my small jurisdiction has had is there are certain vehicles that are not readily available, garbage trucks or street sweepers or other types of vehicles, but perhaps by doing procurement on a regional level, it might make it more available. We might be able to find vendors to actually provide some of these vehicles, not just vehicles, but other types of equipment that our public works departments may use that, they're just not that available. It used to be a problem with police cars, but now it's not so much of a problem. So I just wanted to frame that point.
Yeah. And just to that point, the White House announced a new initiative this week on the medium heavy-duty fleet, and I know that the Greater Washington Regional Clean Cities has a new executive director, Antoine Thomas, who is really trying to quickly get up to speed and get involved with that aspect of the market. It's definitely been a challenge. I know we've been doing heavy diesel equipment retrofits to improve efficiency, including the locomotives over here at Union Station. And those off-road equipment, it's a little easier to make the case to get some federal funding, and it's been a little bit more of a challenge to address that kind of medium and heavy-duty on-road fleet. But I think there's some changes afoot that we can start to look at and take advantage of.
All right, terrific. Mr. Wolf?
Yeah, I was just wondering, Mr. King, Conti, we're focusing on EVs, and that's great, but I'm not aware of anywhere that's really solved the infrastructure problem of EVs in a true urban environment. What are you hearing, particularly with regard to hydrogen fuel cell technology? And that is an alternative, because I happen to follow the news in the UK, and that's the direction they're tending to go. Appreciate your input.
Yeah, well, interesting. I was the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, you're familiar with, does...
I am.
Yeah, they do a really good job of transatlantic climate collaboration, and when I was in Stuttgart with Bob Lazaro and Dale, we were meeting with the kind of the lead automotive engineers in the world, and one of the guys was formerly from Japan and led their hydrogen effort for decades, and I asked him, what's going to win what's going to win out in the long term? Electric vehicles or hydrogen, and he straight up said hydrogen. And it's interesting. 2, 3, 4 years ago, hydrogen seems to always be that thing that's 10 years down the road. But clearly, there's some major changes afoot in that market globally. A lot of investment going in. One of the things we've heard as part of a steering committee for the Connected DMV initiative, which is trying to prop up a new hydrogen center, is there are a massive amount of investors wanting to put their capital into hydrogen production, and the real challenge globally is how do we prop up the demand? Because there are folks ready out there to make it. It's just how do we get to the point?
And they're doing that in the UK, and of course Airbus has got a jet now flying with a hydrogen jet engine.
Yeah, and a whole other topic of conversation, you might at some point bring in the Connected DMV folks and have them present on hydrogen. They, interestingly, Amazon and the Airports Authority are part of that group, and there is interest in the hydrogen for aviation here in the region. So,
Thank you.
All right, let's see. Ms. Wheeler, and then we'll go to people on the WebEx.
Thank you, Chair Dorsey. I just want to piggyback off from Mr. Jordan's comment about if we ever get to the point where we're doing something together with procurement, I think it would be advantageous to also have a tag-along maintenance agreement, because what I've run into is not necessarily the purchasing of vehicles, but how does one maintain them, and that tends to scare people off. And so if in conjunction with purchasing, if we could have some kind of maintenance thought afterwards, that would be useful.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Ms. Partman, do we have anyone on the WebEx with a comment? We don't. Excellent. Mr. Schneider.
Chairman, I don't know when it's appropriate or what sort of action you were looking for, but I for one, think that those
Excellent, excellent. I think we're heading in that direction, but I do want to make sure any questions or comments about the other two suggested priorities are given full attention. So why don't we move now to priority 2, renewables, particularly with the leading by example from the government and local communities. Mr. Lusk, Ms. Jackson.
May I defer to the third opportunity, please?
Third, okay, I'll make sure you're in line for that one. Ms. Jackson, did you have your hand up? No, you didn't. Okay. Anyone else on this one? Mr. Allen, and then Ms. Gross.
Just very briefly on this, as we talk about, for example, the A, Bs, and Cs, what I don't see is the steps that we have to take or that we need to explore further steps around how it is that we're also converting buildings or new building construction to be electric, which then allows us to be able to move towards renewables. So, for example, there's a larger conversation going around, should new construction, this is more in the residential space, but should new construction not be built with gas, for example, so that we can then incentivize the electrification of that building, which then allows us to focus on the renewable. So I think that I would perhaps throw a D into this list of trying to think about also those types of policies and initiatives that allow us to think about our future construction to be more ready or start from scratch, to be focused on being more in the renewable space.
And thank you, and in getting head nods from staff that that's something certainly to incorporate. And I say this not to be a wet blanket, but as a cautionary tale, and just to give maybe further insight into why coming up with 3 opportunities is more of an art than a science. You know, the ability to ban natural gas connections, for example, is something that we're seeing in some places. Within our region, some people have the autonomy to do that. In other cases, others are prohibited from doing it. So, you know, we have to think about what is the Venn diagram of what can be most inclusive in the region. So I think we can definitely figure out a way to include that, because I think even for those who are prohibited from outright bans, we're trying to figure out how to create incentives so that people are moving into that space. So I think that's certainly meritorious of inclusion, for sure. Supervisor Gross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like all 3 of the items, and I want to second Chairman Wheeler's comment about maintenance. Maintenance has to be built into all of these. It gets lost, and it needs to be built into everything, not just electric vehicles, but everything. Those are green jobs. Those are green jobs. But on item number 2, I just wanted to highlight something on deploy solar on government buildings, and it's government and school buildings, very definitely. We're trying to do that in Fairfax County. We had a number of buildings identified. We had solar installer groups bid on this contract, and then in looking further at the buildings we had selected, a number of buildings fell off of the list, and then the solar company said, we can't make that work. It's not enough. So I think as we become more sophisticated in figuring this out, we can make it work. But in the meantime, also, a small jurisdiction like yours, Jordan, could be, you know, you might not have enough to really implement with a particular installer. But if we bundle some of these contracts together, even if we're going across jurisdictional lines, which may or may not be a problem, this is something that COG could really help with, I think, in finding those areas where we could benefit from the collaboration instead of just doing it sort of stovepipe within our own jurisdictions, because our goal is regional. You know, yes, my goal is for Fairfax County, but my goal also is for the region. So let's make sure that we don't have artificial barriers or maybe even real barriers to that kind of collaboration and cooperation. It may also be, I think, we're finding that maybe some of these solar installation groups may not be robust enough to actually do what we would like them to do. We've all jumped onto this bandwagon but discovered that the little tractor that's pulling the wagon isn't quite big enough. So there needs to be some additional opportunity, I would think, for encouragement of these solar installers to really do, you know, it's a great opportunity for them, it's a great opportunity for us, but if our eyes are bigger than our stomach and they think they can do it, but we discover they can't, then we're sort of stuck right where we are. So I just wanted to offer that as a caution that we've discovered in Fairfax County. We're working through it, but I wouldn't be surprised if other jurisdictions, especially the smaller ones, may have similar issues. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the renewable energy opportunity? I will just say as a comment about Arlington County, when we committed to 100% of county operations from renewable sources by 2025, we did that a couple of years ago. You know, at the time that our staff was working through it, in their full honesty, they described it in terms of, we think it's achievable, we're moving in that direction, it's a leap. We're going to reach that goal 2 years early. And so I think over and over in this space, we're seeing that whatever ambition you can name today and whatever limitations you can see today, the space is moving where you're going to be able to ride opportunities, but you're not if you don't put that out there as a goal. So I know some jurisdictions are probably like 100%, really? Like 100% means all. Yeah, and it's possible. It's possible. People are doing it throughout the region. So, all right, I think we've got consensus on 2 as well. Let's move to the third one, and Mr. Lusk, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the building efficiency, and again, I appreciate this point about building energy performance standards, but I have a question. I'm just thinking out loud here, so don't kill me. If we look at the LEED certification and the Green Building Council, when they are looking at buildings, they look at the building at a point in time. So it meets all the criteria to be LEED Silver at that particular point in time, meets all the criteria for LEED Platinum or LEED Gold. But the question is, what happens like 5 years, 10 years down the line? So I don't believe they're going back and like recertifying those buildings. So the question is, could they help us monitor and determine whether these buildings can continue? Because as you look at the building, they put on the outside a plaque that says this is a LEED Silver building, or this is a LEED Platinum building, or LEED Gold building. But in the future, it might not be. The efficiency goes down year after year. The HVAC systems, all of the infrastructure changes over time. So the question is, can we work with maybe the Green Building Council to help us figure out how we ensure that these buildings retain their efficiency over time?
Yes, that's certainly something we can look at. We have a technical committee here, COG, the Built Environment Energy Advisory Committee. One of the staff on our team, Leah Boggs, runs that and works very closely with, and it's not just USGBC, but there's some other rating programs out there. I do think that, clearly they're aware of the issue you're speaking of, and it's not an area that I'm, fully steeped, so I'd have to defer to Leah, but certainly something we've looked at over the years, worked on over the years at that kind of staff level. I do think the building energy performance requirements that are being looked at in Montgomery and already in place in the district kind of get to that, and that they have to measure their energy every year and show that they're meeting the standard that's required, but
and those are certainly options that are available to Virginia jurisdictions. If you approve buildings through special exception processes, you can absolutely require those same things and be very aggressive with your energy efficiency standards. Other comments in this regard? Chair Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Avini talked about this, and so did Mr. King. We have taken this government by example very serious in Loudoun County. And I remember, like in my first term, I drove by our county building, and it was on a weekend evening. It was lit up like a Christmas tree. And I just thought, what is happening? And I went and talked to General Services staff, and, our buildings now, if you're in your office, if you're not moving for a certain amount of time, the lights go out. We've actually looked at all of our HVAC systems again to see if they're as efficient as possible. Of course, we put into our comp plan to have the EV charging stations at all county buildings. And so Mr. Lusk is correct. It is one thing to look at new buildings, but so many of our buildings are there already, and we're not going to be building new buildings in a long time. But it is really surprising what you can do in buildings that are already there, that are very environmentally focused, sustainable, and it's just a matter of keeping up with it and doing it all the time. So I challenge anyone to drive by your county building at 9 o'clock on a Saturday and look at it and see, is it lit up? Because it really shouldn't be. Are all the lights on in all the offices? And that's what kind of started this path that we're on now. It's just one phone call to general services and seeing what's going on in our building, and it just kind of it's spread throughout the system. So we're taking very seriously the leading by example, and it's not as hard as you might think if you look at small things that you can do every single day. We no longer have bottled water in our building. We have pitchers of water that with filtration system, and we've bought glasses. We all types of things that don't sound like huge ideas, but they really are when you start putting them all together.
And remember, turn off the lights. All right, seeing no others in the room, how about on the WebEx? Do we have anyone? All right, so I think for this, I think what's pretty clear is I think the board believes that you're on the right track here, that these are 3 good opportunities that we'd like to take advantage of. So I think we can encourage continued work and thinking in all 3 areas. I'd like to ask specifically with regard to EVs, because taking Vice Chair Allen's comments to heart, just got to do this. It's not a matter of pontificating about it. And so I would like to ask Mr. Bean if you can direct the staff to really just engage with the known parties and jurisdictions who would be working on this stuff to really figure out how we convene a committee of the willing there to get to work, figure out what the landscape is, what our opportunities and obstacles are, and then if you can, after such time as report back to us, and then maybe we can figure out if a work group of the board or a task force is in order to really guide this towards some concrete deliverable to reflect the priority status that we all have for it. Seeing head nods, that works. All righty. I'd now like to ask if there's any other business that anyone would like to bring before the COG board today. Ms. Gross.
Mr. Chairman, just on your comment just now, we have CEPC, which is our Climate, Energy, and Environmental Policy Steering Committee. I don't know that we need to have a separate committee set up for...
That very well may be true.
Use what we got.
That very well may be true, but I know we also haven't had conversations with the policy committee to see how this would align with their plans as well. But thank you for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other business to come before the COG board today? Seeing none, before we adjourn, just a reminder that our next meeting will be virtual, and that's April 13th, before our plan to return in person on May 11th. I'd like to thank everybody for joining in person. Don't forget your door prize. Those of you who are on the WebEx, sorry, but you'll have to wait for it to come in the mail. Otherwise, we are adjourned.